Hello everyone, my name is Daniel and I recently passed a CPE or C2 exam. As you can see, I got 211 points as an overall score and I did better in certain parts. So I'm here to give you some tips and advice, especially for those two areas that I did best, that I think could actually help you take those skills to the next level. Or maybe not, I'm just here giving you what worked for me. Maybe it won't work for you, but I'm here to share all about my experience mostly. So in my case, I took the digital version of the exam. That was the only option available at the moment. And I think that was actually the right option for me, especially because you get to listen the listening part with headphones. And also in the writing part, the examiners don't really have to struggle with understanding my handwriting. I do have very sloppy handwriting and I'm more used to writing or actually typing on a computer. So I think that was more of what I'm used to on a daily basis. Also, I took 6 months of preparation formally because I hired somebody else. In my city, the Cambridge office actually offered a CPE preparation course that lasted just 6 months. And I think that was the right choice for me. I really had a nice instructor. And I think actually helped me, especially with the use of English part, which I will talk in more detail. All right, let's get down to the nitty-gritty. For the speaking part, I would definitely recommend to try to learn as many synonyms as possible. In the CPE, there's no way you are allowed to use the same word twice. Sure, repetition sometimes is unavoidable, but you only have about 7 minutes to impress the assessors, which is why you should try to learn as many C2 vocabulary or synonyms in order to avoid following or falling into the same pattern. So, I would definitely advise to use Cambridge Dictionary as much as possible. It's a really good tool. You can even add the words right there, and you can have like a collection of words that you can go over and over again. Also, try to learn as many expressions as possible to ask for opinion or to give your opinion and so on for each element of the speaking part. The lexical range and the communicative achievement, I think are those two areas that are within your control. So try to learn as many expressions and synonyms as you can. The next part would be fluency, which for CAE and CPE I think it's out of the question. So in order to do so, I know it's hard, especially if you live in a country where English is not among the language that is spoken. I would definitely advise to use Episodem. I haven't really found any other platform that offers, first of all, free and offers one-to-one conversations in an environment that you can feel comfortable or safe compared with other places where you can have conversation. On caveat, I would say that some of them maybe are not in an advanced level of English. Most of them are at best B1, B2, but you might run into some people that actually have good range of vocabulary and are really well spoken. Another advice that I would give for the speaking part is to try to use phrases or synonyms that you're not very familiar with. It's always easy to go to the words that you're most used to speak. However, try to use the least frequent for you, just so that when you are in the exam and you're focused on the task, you're not really thinking about, okay, what's my next word? Just comes off naturally for you. Especially because you might have a really wide range of lexical knowledge. However, that's passive, it's not active. That means when you are speaking, you're not really using or thinking of using these words. They don't come naturally to your mind. So my recommendation is try to use the least frequent ones until they become common for you. Next part is the listening. And this is the part where I got the perfect score. Try to set yourself in the most difficult conditions. What I mean by that is have some background noise or listen at a lower volume. I know it sounds like I'm actually giving you advice how not to listen to an audio, but if you're prepared for those kind of conditions or situations or setting, I think during the exam where you're wearing headphones in a quiet environment is going to be perfectly easy for you to do. So my advice, like I said at the beginning, try to test or challenge yourself, and if during the exam it's not as hard, then I think you did a great job when you were preparing. Another advice that I would give you for the listening part is they really like to throw these perhaps not so common expressions in English, because the proficiency exam really tries to test the boundaries and to see how well you're familiar with the language. So I would definitely recommend to listen to BBC English Conversations. In that program, that podcast, they include 2-minute videos where they cover on some idioms or expressions. Some are more familiar than others, but it's well to get as many as you can, because sometimes in the listening they might throw some of these, especially in parts 4 or parts where you can hear a conversation, and so you don't get taken aback by listening to this for the first time. Try to get familiar or acquainted with as many as you can. Also, be aware that in the listening part, they really like to throw these structures. So you should really have a clear strategy about what to pay attention to and what not to. Because the exam itself, in the listening part at least, is 40 minutes long. So it's a lot of listening that you have to do. So try to be sure of what parts to listen and what parts to ignore in order so you don't get mentally drained. Let me know if you would like me to do a demonstration of the listening part for the CPE exam in order to point out where I like to pay attention or where I feel like I shouldn't. Now, for the reading part, I would definitely recommend to try to get as familiar as you can with reading newspapers such as The Guardian or the BBC News, especially because they use the kind of register that you would see in most readings in the CPE. They really like to take articles or from magazines or scientific news or historical news in order to test those very long reading and comprehension questions. So I would definitely advise to try to acquire the jargon or the specific language, the C2 vocabulary that they like to throw in that. So if you're planning on taking the exam a year in advance, I would say it's the perfect timing to start and getting used to this kind of vocabulary or context. For the use of English, I would absolutely recommend you to try to focus on part 4. I think sentence transformation was the area that did the most or brought the most out of my English knowledge, because they like to test how well you're familiar with certain structures that are not very conventional. However, they're still part of the English language. So try to get as many exercises as you can from part 4 exam, also called sentence transformation, informally, but try to really practice those and understand the grammar so you don't get surprised or caught off guard whenever you are in the exam. I would also link all the resources that I use for preparing for my exam in the description, so you feel free to check them out. Now, for the writing part, I would really recommend to try to get as familiar as you can with the format of each of the possible options that you can do. In the CPE, you have an essay that's a mandatory text, and in part 2, you have some options. They will give you either a report, an article, a letter, or a review. So try to get familiar as much as you can with the structure for each, and try to look for really good examples of what makes a good article or a good report in order to copy the format and the style especially. Also, it's out of the question, you have to practice on writing. And this is why for the writing part, I think it's one of the areas where it's of the essence to have somebody to assess your writings. Sure, you can use elements such as AI, but I don't think it can really replace the feedback that you can get from someone that is experienced in the field. Now, for this last part, I would like to also share some of the content creators that I followed that I would really recommend. Most of you probably know Ben from To The Point English with Ben. You can really pay attention to some of the C2 synonyms that he likes to throw and share. Also, those community polls that he sometimes makes are really useful. Now, I would actually really recommend to follow this Instagram account. She's really good with sharing feedback about writing and some of the elements that actually make a good writing, pointing it out and breaking them down. Also, among the books that I used to consult was Objective Proficiency and Advanced Grammar in Use. Both of them will be in the description in the video. Now, some sources of podcasts that I recommend you to listen is C2 Proficiency Quest. BBC Global News, they really use the kind of register that you're expected to have or get acquainted with in this exam. And Luke's English podcast. All of the resources I think are really good, and they even happen to teach me something new till this day. And even though I'm proficient, that doesn't mean that there is nothing else for me to learn in the language. English is just so wide that you cannot really know everything there is to know about it. So I think that is actually the mindset that you really should have for this CPE exam, that it's not really about the fact that you get C2 or not. It's more about the journey of challenging and testing how much you know about the language. And finally, if you are considering taking this exam or are already preparing for it, I would definitely advise to just be patient. There are plenty of occasions where I thought I didn't have what it takes to pass this exam, and it's perfectly normal. I think that's actually a good sign that proves that you're actually testing your boundaries and seeing how well you know the language. And if you're on track, you're gonna have good days and bad days, but that's perfectly normal. So there you have it. Feel free to leave any questions in the comments, and I will try my best to answer to all of them. That's all from me now, and good luck on your C2 Proficiency quest.